have someone returning who's done a University Religious Forum before and is a friend of ours at Campus Ministry. Her name is Nancy Williams. Let me introduce her to you. She is a licensed mental health counselor for a counseling service here in town called Cornerstone Vision Counseling. They have offices here in Fort Wayne and also in Bern, where she and her husband live. Nancy's practice as a licensed therapist for families and individuals in Northeast Indiana for 25 years. She's also served as the director for women's ministries and support group ministries in her previous staff position with the First Assembly of God Christian Center here in Fort Wayne. Nancy's an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God. Her husband Don is an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God, and they're now serving in Assembly of God Church in Bern.
It's missionary. A missionary church in Bern.
Missionary church.
Yeah, he's
okay.
A missionary pastor.
But I got the city right.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Details.
She also has been an instructor, including teaching at Sophia Pentecostal Bible College in Sofia, Bulgaria, which is a place we also have visited frequently as campus ministry. She's also been an instructor here at IPFW and at the Indiana School of Ministry, which is the Indiana District Assemblies of God School. In 2012, she founded a very interesting consulting service. It's called Core Dynamics. And it's a consulting service for organizations to strengthen their relational and team dynamics for employees and team members. And so she serves companies, ministries, and organizations in that capacity. So if you have a need along those lines and you direct one of those organizations, then it might be worth contacting Nancy and talking to her about that. As I said, she's married to Don, has been for 31 years, and is a mom to 3. Landon's 25, Mackenzie's 24, and Lindsay's 24. Twins? Yeah. I figured that was the case, or else it would have really been biologically strenuous.
Yeah.
Well, without any further ado, Nancy's going to talk to us today about control versus addiction. What do you do when you can't stop? So, Nancy, please share with us.
So I want to thank you for coming today. One of the things that when Melissa asked me to speak, when anybody says, "Can you want to come and talk about addictions?" I always say, well, what part of addictions do you want to know about? Because addictions is such a broad topic, and it can involve so many things. And one of the things, when we think about addictions, a lot of times we think immediately about the really tough things like drugs, alcohol, pornography, shopping, and we can kind of go down the list of things that we can be addicted to. So I want to tell you a story about 2 ladies, and I will change their names even though this was a long time ago. I worked at an inpatient program, and there were 2 ladies there. I will call them Barbara and Julie. That is not their real names. They both were addicted to drugs. They came to our program because we were kind of like the last stop. For Barbara, it was more of a stop because her other option was going to prison. She had done drugs for very many years. She had a family, she had a husband, she had kids, and she was caught dealing, not only using, but also dealing in drugs, and it was an option that she could have to come to our program instead of prison, which sometimes works, but usually it's one of those things. She didn't really come there to change her life. She came there to avoid prison. And she came there, and when she came, she was like, I want to change, I want to change, I want to do the things that I need to do. But it was in the back of her mind, and the motive for doing it was not so she would change herself. It was to stay out of prison or to keep her family. And we're going to find out later as we talk, or as I talk about addictions, that if you have an addictive personality and you have an addiction problem, you can't get over it because someone else wants you to. So today you may be sitting here saying, you know what, I want to know how to help someone with an addiction, or I want to be the person that has an addiction problem and I want to know how to walk it out. So we're going to kind of deal with both sides of that you can apply it to yourself personally, or you can apply it to other people. So my other illustration is the lady, her name was Barbara, and Barbara came to us. She was pretty much at the end of her rope. She was in high school and she was an athlete, and she gave up basically her career of getting a college scholarship because she was in an accident, and she got addicted to not only pain medications, but the pain medications kind of were the gateway drug for her to get involved in other drugs. And so she did not graduate from high school, but she was an athlete, and she was addicted to drugs. She sold drugs at elementary schools, and her life was just completely falling apart. And during this time of her life, she just thought, my life is over. Her whole dream had been on this trajectory of going, I am going to go to college on a scholarship. I'm going to play sports. I'm going to, be an athlete, a college athlete. And when that was taken away and depression hit, and then the drugs, and then she got addicted to street drugs, she just felt like her life was over. And the time of her life where she was really contemplating suicide, she met somebody that said, you know what, there's a program, if you really want to turn your life around and you're really at a place where you want to change, I would like you to, consider going to this. It was basically a farm in the middle of Iowa, and it was a rehab place. And so that's where I was doing my internship. And during the time that she came there, as you know, addicts go through a time of, drying out, if you will. And she had walked through a lot of the different parts of the program, which was really, really good. The problem was every time she reached the pinnacle of changing her behavior and having to live in the new way of recovery, living free without the drugs, the things of her past that kind of drug her into that were still there. So every time she would reach a pinnacle of, I can do this, she would take like 2 steps backward. And if you've ever dealt with addicts, you know that that's part of the process of taking the 2 steps backwards. And one of the things is she went through the program, and I was there for 11 weeks. I watched her walk through difficult times with her family, difficult times with decisions she needed to make. And it was interesting walking through her journey of when she would take these couple steps back, of having her realize that she was not going to be able to do this on her own. And every time she took a step back, she would trust God a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And in my short time there, what I realized was I would like to be part of the journey of somebody that was going to take a step back. Not just the person that wanted to change their life, but the person during that time of taking that step back. They wanted to get better, but they would take 2 steps backwards. And so I looked at these 2 women. One went back to the lifestyle. She had to leave the program, and she never really wanted to get out of the drug life. What she wanted was she wanted to avoid the consequences of it. Where Barbara, what she did is she said, you know what, I want to get out of this lifestyle. And if I were to show you pictures today, I can show you that after that program, she got her life together. She finished the program. She went on to marry. She has 3 children. And one of the things that I feel blessed about, this was about 30 years ago, and I was blessed this last year to reconnect with her. And because of social media and different things, we kind of found each other. And I was able to thank her for helping me kind of during that part of my life be able to say, you know what, when an addict has a problem, they need a community around them to help them walk it out. And one of the things it did, it defined for me what I was supposed to do with my life. And as we talked, she was thanking me for the part of, thank you for believing in me and seeing past all the pain and the agony and the things that led her to drugs. And so I want to encourage you today, if you're here today saying, you know what, I have a friend who's an addict, or I have a family member and I don't know how to help them. I obviously in an hour can't go over everything to do, but I want to give you some steps to be able to help you to be able to say, okay, what is my role in this? Or if you're the person today sitting here and saying, you know what, I have an addiction. I really want to stop doing this. I really, truly do. And you can think about whatever the addiction is, and you're like, okay, this is the last time I'm going to do this. And if it's about my free will and it's about me being strong enough, I'll be able to do it this time. And then you find yourself back into what you're doing. That's the discouraging part. And it's almost like a slippery slide where you just kind of go down. So I want to encourage you today. I'm going to use some scripture and just kind of show you that, first of all, one of the things the Bible talks about walking through tough times and walking through the journey, basically, of having Christ in your life, that you don't have to do that alone. So I'm going to preface that as we're going to use some scriptures to be able to talk about that. So I want us to ask yourself these questions. Now, these can be personal, or these can be you're saying, you know what, I want to walk through an addiction with someone else. But these are the questions I want you to ask yourself this morning. Do you ever look forward to engaging in a habit when you should be doing something else? Now, this doesn't mean that it has to be drugs or alcohol. It can be playing Candy Crush on your phone while you're supposed to be in class, okay? When you are upset or sad, do you engage in a habit to feel better? Do you ever lose time from work or school due to a habit? Do you ever feel remorse after participating in a certain habit? Does your habit make you careless of the welfare of your family, friends, or yourself? Do you ever engage in a habit longer than you had planned and then make excuses about it? Do you have a habit to escape worry or trouble? Do arguments, disappointments, or frustrations occur as a result to your habit? I want you to think about the answers to those questions, and then I want to give you the definition of what addiction is. The definition of addiction is a compulsive or strong, harmful need to regularly have something or to do something. It's a dependence on a habit that is known by the user to be harmful. And harmful doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to harm you, but it can be wasting time. It can be harmful to your schedule. It can be harmful to your body. Okay, so just think about harmful in those terms. So if you answered yes to probably more than 5 questions, yes to more than 5 questions that I just asked you, you probably have addictive tendencies. And by that I mean we do things to escape. And I think that's okay. We need to have escape. You guys are, you guys are students, your schedule's crazy, you guys are under a tremendous amount of stress, and you need escapes. What we're going to talk about today is how do I have an escape that is healthy for me and not something that's going to harm me. So you may say, okay, how do I take something that can start out to be something that's going to help me and it's going to help me escape? How do I know when that escape turns into something that's harmful? So I'm just going to go over the phases of life of controlling problems. And there's 4 different ways. First of all, it's experimentation, where somebody's just kind of experimenting, saying, you know what, they heard about a new thing, they heard about a new drink, a new drug, something like that, and say, you know what, this is going to help you calm down. It's going to help you stay awake. It's going to help you. I use one of the things as a therapist, you read about all the addictions, and then, I get to the bottom, and they're like, caffeine is an addiction. I was like, let's not talk about that one. Let's not talk about what caffeine can do and those kind of things. So, but the experimentation doesn't work. Next, you go to the social where you're saying, okay, I'm using this more regularly, it's socially acceptable, or I have to hide it from society if it's something that's not socially acceptable. Do you see how that can work both ways? Is it something I have to do daily? Is it something that I look forward to that I have to do daily to be able to say, okay, for me to make it through the day, I need to do this? And then it can move into, I have to do this behavior. It becomes normal. I have to do this behavior to feel normal. And I think that's kind of the definition of what we're going to talk about as far as what an addiction looks like. So today, I'm not going to have you raise your hand of whether you use drugs or alcohol or too much and drink too much coffee, whatever. I'm going to use something today that I want probably most everyone in here has. I want everyone to get their phone out. Okay? Does anybody in here not have a cell phone? And I'm not trying to, okay, if you don't have one, just play along like you do, okay? Take your phone. How many people in here are already a surgeon that could be called out to do a surgery? Any EMS people? Okay, I see is there anything emergency that you would have to be? Okay. I want everyone to shut their phone off. Not silent it, but I want you to shut it off. Actually, take it and I want you to shut it off. The reason I wanted to do a disclaimer if somebody really was going to get called out for surgery or something like that. Okay, now, for all of you, I want you to think about what the first thing that went through your mind. No one is going to tell me what to do. I came here for free pizza today. I came here for this. No one's going to tell me what to do with my phone. If that was the first thought in your head, you might be a phone addict. I won't look at it anyway. This is my favorite. My Bible's on it. She said we're going to use scripture. Okay, I can give you this, if that is you, I can give you my notes and you can look up all the scripture later. But somebody might get a hold of me, you don't understand, my kids might need me, my mom might need me, somebody's in the hospital. Do you understand probably the next 30 minutes you're okay? I want you to think about what goes through our head, because we are rebellious people. If you don't believe me, you can go back to Genesis and talk about Adam and Eve. So basically, I want you, usually the first thing that goes into our mind in a group like this is, I don't know who she is, but she's not going to tell me what to do. And I want you to think about that. I'm not going to go check your phones, okay? But I want you to understand, usually we are so addicted to social media. We're addicted to, I have to be here, somebody's going to call me, okay? If it's that significant other, they're going to be mad. They're going to wonder where I'm at, okay? All those things that we become accustomed to because we have social media in front of us. And I'm choosing to do this because all of you have your phone for different reasons. Some of you say, I only brought it because my Bible's on it. Some of you, for whatever reason, okay? I'm not going to go through all the reasons of why you would have to have your phone, why you would have to have it on, and why it's uncomfortable to shut it off. But I want you to understand that what it feels like if you're saying, you know what, I've never really had an addiction problem. I've never really had anything that made me uncomfortable. Hopefully what I just had you do made you a little bit uncomfortable, and you had to think about, what does it feel like for somebody else to tell you what to do? What does it feel like to be able to say, okay, I may have a problem in this area and I don't really want to admit it, and I'm not going to tell anybody what my first thought was. Because when we are addicted to something, we make all the excuses of why. So if I were to ask all of you, and for time's sake I won't, but if I were to ask all of you, why was it uncomfortable? First of all, was it uncomfortable to shut your phone off? And then I would ask you why. You would all probably have a different reason. So understand, we justify why we do what we do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to the way our society is today, our society is more worried about being politically correct than it is about teaching the truth. And when you're dealing with an addict, it's really difficult because every addict, I always have a definition for somebody that's an addict. They are a manipulator and they are a liar. Because they have a reason for why they do what they do. If they didn't have a reason, they wouldn't be doing it. And how they got further into their addiction is they have convinced themselves that this is right for me, this is what I need to do, and whatever the excuse follows. So understand, in this world we live in, that everything has to be politically correct. Truth is no longer a standard, and it's no longer popular to even speak the truth. So you're saying, okay, well, how can I help somebody with an addiction if they have to know truth to be able to get out of it? So what I want to do is tell you that when we are going to offer hope, and as Christians, we can offer hope to people. I am a therapist in a Christian agency, and I've worked in Christian agencies most of my career. And I will tell you that I have lots of clients of different faith. I have people that come in and say, do not talk to me about the Bible, do not talk about Jesus, do not talk about God. And I'm like, okay, legally I have to do that, and I'm okay with that, because I know that the techniques I'm going to use are biblical. I just don't have to tell anybody they came from the Bible. So I want you to know what I'm telling you and the hope to give somebody is biblical, but some people aren't ready to hear, nor do they care that it came from the scripture. But you, as the person that's dealing with the addiction or helping somebody, you can say, okay, I know this works because it's truth. And offering hope in a situation is, a lot of times you hear testimonies of people that have addictions. And in their testimonies, what they'll say is, I prayed and I never wanted to use cocaine again. I prayed and I never wanted to use alcohol again. And I think those are great testimonies. And I will tell you, I believe that happens, and I know that that happens every single day, and God is really good to people that happens to. But I will tell you, the people that end up in my office, and pretty much in my life what I've had to deal with, God doesn't usually zap me and say, I'm going to take away your temptation. What he has me do is he has me walk it out. And when you're an addict, what happens is you say, this time I'm going to do it. This time I went to the altar. This time I prayed. And then you wake up in 3 weeks and you're like, how did I get back here? And you feel like you're on this merry-go-round that you can't get off. And when somebody's an addict, what happens is that's when the line begins. Because people think that they're okay, and they have to pretend like everything's okay, and they have to pretend that they aren't doing what they're doing because they didn't want to disappoint someone. Do you see how when I said they're a liar and they're a manipulator? Because they want to manipulate around to make it look like everything's fine. Because we live in a world that says we pretty much want unicorns and rainbows. We want everything to always look okay. And reality is, most of us don't live in unicorns and rainbows. Those are the people that would come to my office over the years, and they would say, I need you to help me. And the only hope that I know how to give them is, I go to Paul. When Paul says in the New Testament, when he talks about his struggle, and he says, I have a struggle, I have a thorn in my flesh. God didn't take away my thorn in my flesh. What he did is he has me experience that thorn in my flesh to help, to remind me that I can't do this on my own. And because we live in such a politically correct society, what we've become to do is how I feel is pretty much, God wouldn't want me to feel like this if he didn't want me to follow through with it. So if I feel like I need drugs, alcohol, sex, shopping, gambling, same-sex relationships, whatever I feel like, God would not let me have that feeling if he didn't want me to follow through with it. And what we've done is we've taken temptation and made it a feeling. Just because you're tempted to do something doesn't mean that it's right and doesn't mean that it's not sin, if that makes sense. So I want you to understand when you are fighting an addiction, that feeling is so overwhelming that most of the time you're not going to be able to come out of it by yourself. And that's the lie of Satan, to say, if I isolate a person, I can destroy them. And so that's where a lot of times when you see somebody and they've gotten help and then they slip back into their addictive behavior, their friends go by the wayside because they don't want them to know. They want to continue to deceive and pretend like everything's okay when it's really not. And that's the part where a lot of times you'll hear, we need to do an intervention. Well, to the person that's an addict, they hear the intervention is like, okay, now you have to go to the principal or the dean and you're going to get in trouble. When a real intervention is, okay, I see through your stuff. You know, whether it's like an eating disorder or you see the alcohol in their trash and you're just going, okay, I thought you gave that up. It isn't about judgment. It's about saying, I want to walk through this with you. And I want to show you just in it, the short time we have here, I want you to see that in the scriptures, God knew that we were going to get it wrong. I think a lot of times we look at addictions by don't do this. One of the things in the introduction, he mentioned that we have 3 children. And when they were growing up, one of the things that how we used to tell them what the things that they could choose to do, we always worded it in the way of, I hope you choose not to do this. Because we knew that if we told them not to do it, I know what I was like. I know I'm old, but I know what I was like as a teenager. Tell me not to, just like turning that phone thing off. I know what we go through. You're not going to tell me what to do. I don't even know. You're not going to tell me what to do. So since my children are offspring of me and they have really strong wills like I do, we knew if we told them not to, that was like saying, here, go try that. So we always instilled in them the responsibility of, I hope you choose not to do this. And if you choose to do this, there's going to be a consequence. And you have to live with the consequence of your choices. So when you look at Romans 5, now I know if your Bible was on your phone, you're going to look at me and go, I can't look this up. If you email me, or I will get you the notes so you can know what this is. But Romans 5, and I'm not going to read all of it, but I'm going to read some key verses. It's Romans 5, 1 through 11, and it talks about hope. And I want to give you a definition of hope, because hope, a lot of times, when we hear the word hope, we think about the unicorns and rainbows. This is my light at the end of the tunnel. This is what I need. And I want you to see in this passage in Romans, and I'm going to tell you how I have given hope to people that are addicts. It's 4 words: risk, struggle, surrender, and wait. The first part of hope is you have to take the risk and say, I actually have a problem. I actually need help here. I can't do this on my own. The risk is I have to own what's really going on. I have to be honest with what's going on. I have to admit that I have a problem. I have to admit I have an addiction. In Romans 5:2, it says, because of our faith, Christ has brought us into this place of undeserved privilege where we now stand, and we confidently and joyfully look forward to sharing God's glory. And what you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to take the risk here to trust God because he promised that he would walk through this with me. The second part is the struggle part, where you said, I've already tried this. The denial, I need to get over myself. I manipulate. I lie about the addiction even to myself. And in verse 3, it says, we can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance, or they help us develop patience. This is not a place where it says, don't do this. What he's saying is, I knew you were going to, and I knew that you were going to have patience. So what I'm going to tell you here is we can rejoice in that when you run into problems. It doesn't say if you run into problems. It says when you run into problems and trials, for we know that it helps us develop the patience. So it's not just about trying harder. It's not about digging deeper. And for some of you, I remember when we were dealing with Barbara and she would say, this is my last time. This is my last time I'm going to use drugs. Now understand, we were in a program that they couldn't have drugs. Okay, so they would be very creative. They would eat a pound of sugar a day just to get a buzz. They would go out to the lawnmower and try to get high on the fumes. They were very creative. We had a garden, so we let them pick out the flowers. They were going to grow poppy seeds. Okay, I mean, they picked out poppy seeds so they could grow poppies. And the thing is, when we confronted them about what they were doing or what she was doing, she just said, "But it's not what I was doing before." Do you see the excuse in that? I've moved from this to this, and she was making the excuses. So the thing is, the struggle is real. And in Lamentations 3:18, it says, "My splendor is gone, and all that I had hoped from the Lord." And I love Lamentations because Lamentations is a lament. It's basically the whining book. If you've never read Lamentations, it's my favorite because it lets you whine. Now you'll find the Lord in there too, but it lets you whine, and you're able to say, "This is how I really feel," and that's the struggle part. So I want to ask you, don't show me your hand, but how many of you have already looked at your phone, turned it back on, said this is stupid? I want you to see that the struggle is real if you were one of those people that were constantly on your phone. And if you want to try this, keep it off for a half a day. Your friends will probably wonder what happened. And if you're going to do this, because I'm a mom, would you please tell your parents you're doing that? So if they're trying to get a hold of you, they don't think you're like, dead on the highway, especially if it's icy or something out. But I want you to see that when you're in that struggle part, the struggle is real, and it doesn't mean that you failed. It just means that you're struggling. And in that struggle is where you're going to become stronger. The next part in hope is the surrender part. And this is the part where you just kind of throw your hands up and you just say, I can't do this. It's confessing, and it's a true repentance where you're saying, I'm not only going to say what I did, but I know that I can't do this by myself. And we see this in verse 3. It says, we can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance. And then verse 4 says, and endurance develops strength of character. And I want you to think about that. In this surrender part, what you're doing is you're helping the person, or you are walking through it yourself, saying, this is my story. I think a lot of times what happens is we feel like a complete failure, and Satan's right there telling you are a complete failure, when it's really part of your story, and you have to be strong enough to do this. Once again, Lamentations 3:21 says, therefore I have hope because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait on him. And in the surrender part is where you have admitted you were wrong, and you admit it, and you turn away and you say, I can't do this on my own. And then we move into the fourth part of hope. The waiting part. This is where the work comes in. This is where we have to replace what the addiction was, what it did, why you were in the addiction, and how you were going to move forward in that. And it's in that waiting part. In verse 4, it says, and the character strengthens our confident hope of salvation, and this hope will not lead to disappointment, for we know how dearly God loves us, because he has given us the Holy Spirit to fill our hearts with his love. Even in this state of addiction, understand God has never left your side. He's never left the side of the person who's in the addiction, because what God says, he's always there waiting for us to turn around and say, I need to first take the risk. I need to be in the struggle of it because the struggle is real. I need to surrender. And at the end, you need to wait. And in that waiting part is where you're saying, I'm going to engage every single part of who I am. A lot of times we talk about we need to engage in our walk with Christ, in our walk in what we're doing is our body, soul, and spirit. And that's wonderful, and we need to do that. But what I want to add to the addict, and this is how you walk it out, is where you say, but Lord, I need to give you my heart, mind, and my will. Because our free will is the part that gets us into trouble. Our free will is the part that says, I am going to do what I want to, when I want to, and if I feel a certain way, I should be able to act on it. And it's committing that free will to the Lord, and committing that to the Holy Spirit to say, I'm not only going to give you my body, soul, and spirit, but I'm going to give you my heart, what I love, what I hang on to. I'm going to give you my thoughts. I'm going to give you my mind. And I think one of the hardest things we do is to say, Father, I'm going to give you my free will. Make me more like you. Help me understand that temptation and how I feel isn't the sin part. It's acting on that. And help me realize that my free will is up to what I'm doing. And we see this in 2 Corinthians 10:5, where it says, we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And when we take our thoughts captive, it lines up with our heart, and it also helps us engage our free will. So when you say, okay, what does the addict really need? How can I get through the addiction that I have? One of the things is, it's an acronym, and it's very simple. It's just, if you're taking notes, just write down your page answer. It's just the letters answer. The first one is A, is we need acceptance. An addict needs to be accepted by the people around them. Not accepting their behavior and what they're doing, but accept them as a person. And that's Romans 7:18, where it says, and I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sinful nature. I want to do what is right, but I can't. And what you're doing is just admitting I'm a human and I'm going to mess up. N in answer is new start. In Mark 10:27, we see where Jesus says he looked at them intently and said, humanly speaking, it is impossible, but not with God. Everything is possible with God. And we don't, sometimes, even when I was disciplining my children, I would say, okay, you need to do this. I'm going to count to 3, or this is your last chance. Isn't it awesome we serve a God who doesn't give us a last chance? He doesn't say, okay, you had 10 other times and this is the last one. He says, I will give you another chance and another chance and another chance. And that's the new start that he gives us. The S part of answer is support groups. This is where you're not going to do it alone. In James 5:19 and 20, it says, my dear brothers and sisters, if someone among you wanders away from the truth and is brought back, you can be sure that whoever brings a sinner back from wandering will save that person from death and bring about forgiveness of many sins. Understand, Satan tries to isolate, to destroy. That's why you see a lot of people that do addictions and they do them alone. Or they don't admit to groups of people that they're in it, because Satan knows if he can isolate, he can destroy. So the W part of answer is your willingness to say, I'm going to engage my free will in this process. And that's 2 Corinthians 10:3-5. We are human, but we don't wage war as humans do. We use God's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning and to destroy false arguments. We destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture their rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ. And this basically is where the willingness is saying, I'm going to engage my free will in this process. I'm not just going to think about it, but I'm going to engage my free will. The next part is education. And this is where we need to know what the Bible says, and we need to know that just because I feel something and I'm tempted to do something doesn't mean that God placed it there and he's not punishing us. And you can find that in 2 Corinthians 12:7-10. And I'm just going to read part of verse 8. It says, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. And that's the part sometimes it's really hard to tell an addict, because they've been trying and trying and trying. And it's that surrender where they can finally just say, I can't do this on my own. And the last part of the answer is the relapse prevention. And this is where you have to know that an addict is probably going to take 3 steps back. And when they take they could have taken 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, 4 steps forward and 3 steps back. And you look at what they are doing a little bit at a time, because what happens is we have this pass fail. If I'm not over here, then I'm a failure. And you didn't get here overnight. So the thing is to help a person realize that you're going to probably take some steps backward, but that doesn't mean you're back at square one. The best example of that is a bell curve. If you think about a bell curve, and I always say the bell curve on the top of it is your past life and your new life that you want to live. It's more scary for addicts to live in the new life than it is the old life, because they've never lived there before. So the fear of the unknown overtakes them, and that's usually where they take some steps backwards. So you warn people of that. You warn their family about that. You warn their friends about that, and say, when they've walked it out, understand there's going to be a part. They're going to be paralyzed and fearful because they don't know what's on the other side. It's like going to the top of the roller coaster and going, I don't want to do this. Have you ever gotten to the top of the roller coaster after the clicks? You're like, I think I went off the ride, and then you feel the momentum. That's what it feels like to them. And so understand, even though you know, but it's better on this side, they don't know that yet. So understand, that's where a lot of times people get discouraged as you're helping somebody. You're like, well, they're never going to do it. If they were living this way and then they just went back. Okay, it's because they're more afraid of what they don't know than what they do know. So, excuse me, and you can be a strength to help them do that. One of the signs to look for when you're dealing with somebody who is an addict is the stress in their life. Usually, addictions come because of stress. It can come from a lot of different things. And when you're sitting in a stressful situation, if you can train your brain to think these, you can use a stop sign. I usually use this in therapy where I write things out on little Post-it notes. I still use paper in my office, and they can do what they want to if they want to put it on their phone or whatever. But you can write the words HALT. And I know I'm giving you acronyms today, but sometimes when you're helping somebody, you're like, okay, now what's the next step? How am I going to do this? What do I need to do? Because you're in the middle of a conversation or a situation and you're not sure what to do. So if you think of the word here, HALT. HALT means, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Or am I tired? If you look at weight loss programs, a lot of them will have something similar to this about when you're angry, when you're hungry, when you're lonely, when you're tired, you need to do something else so you don't go to the refrigerator. Same thing with your addiction. If you can train yourself to do something besides the addiction when you're hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, that takes away the majority of the time of when you're going to slip back into it. So sometimes it's just retraining somebody to be able to say, you need something else. You need something else to be able to rely on, to go to, your go-to as far as the addiction part. Because when you are helping somebody, I think about my friend Barbara, when we were walking through a lot of the things with her, the times in which she was the most vulnerable was the time when she had to talk to her family. And I remember, and if you went through the HALT things, we knew then when they had times to be able to talk to their family, or when they had visitations from their family, or whatever reminded them of their past, we knew that was the time when we really had to stay close, when we had to involve them in other things, when we had to remind them of who they were and how well they were doing. We needed to put them in a situation, whether it was a group session or whether it was just us one-on-one being able to communicate to them, but you have changed. And remind them of the changes that they have made, and to let them see the goals that they set and that they were achieving. Because it's in those times when they felt like their whole life, they were reminded of what they were back here, and what they didn't realize is that they were walking out a whole new life. Dealing with the addicts, a lot of times when you're dealing with addicts, it's very, very discouraging, because in the idea of dealing with them is watching them walk back into their life and saying, where do I fit now? How do I set that boundary with them? Because there's a fine line, and I see this a lot of times with parents, where they provide everything so the child never feels any pain. Everything in life needs to be fun. Everything in life needs to be entertained. And that's why I had you shut your phone off. If you don't believe me, go into Walmart or a grocery store today. It used to be when I had 3 little kids and I'm trying to maneuver all these things in the grocery store, and I'm sure it's easier today. What are most children doing when they're in the cart? Yes. They're on some kind of electronic device. And I'll tell you, I had 3 kids. We had a little boy, and then 10.5 months later, we had twin baby girls. And I'm telling you, if there had been a tablet to give them in the grocery store, I would have given it to them. I just wanted to make it through without them knocking over anything, screaming for everything. Okay, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but understand what we're teaching the next generation is that we don't have to interface with people. If social media was supposed to do what social media is to connect all of us, we would have less people depressed today. We'd have less lonely people. Do you know that suicide and depression is on the upswing? Do you have any idea why that is? You can talk back. Electronic media. Why does it make us lonelier? If I could see all you guys are doing, if you gave me your thing, I could look at all your pictures, I could do everything. Why does that make me lonely?
But you don't have intimate contact with them.
Okay, not face to face.
And then looking at social media, you can see like everyone seems to be hanging out and not being lonely, and you're the one that's sitting at home alone, and
Yep.
you don't understand why it seems like every day someone's hanging out with someone else.
Okay. You also see the interaction between them.
Yeah.
You also see an idealized version, not necessarily the real person.
Yes. I love the idealized person. To me, especially Facebook, sometimes Twitter, but Facebook especially, is like a really, really bad Christmas letter that never goes away. I was always one of those moms, you know, where you put those things on the bumper sticker on your van that, I don't know if you've seen them, maybe you had one that said, you know, I'm the proud sponsor, or I'm not sponsor, but I'm the proud parent of a child who is, you know, they get A's at this school. And I always wanted to put one on that said, I have an average child. My child makes average grades. Because I'm like, what do you do if you have one really smart, like I have a bumper sticker for you, but you're average, okay? So it's this whole comparing thing. And then we throw it out there on Facebook, and it is. And the whole thing about Facebook is, my daughter has a friend that they did this picture at the beach. You know, they're all dressed in the same little outfits and that, you know, smiling. And her friend, because she can do this, she put it on the caption. She goes, I want you to know we look like the perfect family. Right before this picture was taken, we were all fighting. We don't want to be here. We're all hungry, and you know, we all smiled. And just so you know, this is not a picture of what our family vacation was like. I was like, I just thought that was so funny. I'm like, I wish they would have had like a before and after picture. But the reason I bring up social media so much is because whether it's the tablets, whether it's the phones, we need, like you said, the intimate part of being connected with somebody. One of the things that I literally have students that they don't know how to talk to people, and they're in my practice, and they're really lonely. And I'm like, okay, tell me about these people you're texting, whatever. Well, they're in my history class. Okay, where do they sit? Well, 2 rows over. Like, you could talk to them. Yeah, but I don't. I just text them. Okay? And understand part of the loneliness, and their parents are paying me money to be able to help them be able to be more social. And I'm going, well, take their phone away. It's going to force them to talk to somebody. It's going to force them to do some things. Because God created us to be 3-dimensional. He created us to be physical, emotionally, and spiritual. Well, when the physical element isn't there anymore to be able to talk to somebody. Now, I understand. I like social media. I'm not saying you throw it out the window. I say there needs to be a balance in it. When you are in a restaurant and you see more people talking on the phones than talking to each other, we always had a rule that you could not talk to, you couldn't be on your phone while we were at a family dinner. Now I know this because my children would go to the restroom 2 or 3 times during dinner. I understand they're on their phone, but at least they weren't doing it at the table. And I know of companies, my son works for a company that there are times where they put all the phones in the middle of the table, and whoever picks their phone up first has to buy the drinks for the table or the dinner. Sometimes it's even dinner. Because they realize in the business world that business people and good care, or you know, best care for their clients is not sitting there texting or taking emails. It's actually the one-on-one with the people. And so I encourage you to, loneliness leads people to stay at home and be depressed, and depression leads to bad choices, and it can go down the path from there. And so I want to encourage you that if you are the person struggling with an addiction, I want you to look at not the question why. I think a why question is one that you may never be able to figure out. You can spend a lot of time thinking about that, but I would like to propose a different question to you. What am I going to do next time? What am I going to do next time that I feel lonely? What am I going to do next time that I didn't get invited to a party? Because that's up close and personal when it's on social media. Why did they not call me? Because as people, we want to be included, and we want to be wanted. And part of what happens when you're an addict is that isolation of saying, or you're just around other people like you that are all addicts. Know this, that if you're an addict, or I'll just use this for an example. If you are an alcoholic and you come to me and you say, you know what, I was an alcoholic and I feel like that I am going to go be a bartender now. I feel like I'm supposed to go into the bars and I'm supposed to minister to people in the bars, okay? I use this illustration. I'm aging, but I think there's enough people. Do you guys know what Cheers is? Sometimes I age myself with TV shows. Do you guys know what, some of you shaking your head now? Okay, there used to be a show that was all about a bar in Boston called Cheers, okay? And you would go in there, and the catch line to this bar was, everyone knows your name. And I always say, if you're going to go back into Cheers and tell everyone goodbye, what's the chances one of those people that knows your name is not going to buy you a beer? Okay? So the thing is, if you know you have a problem with something, don't try to prove to yourself and everyone around you, I'm going to go do this to prove that I'm through my addiction. Because what you're going to do, don't be surprised if you fall in that. And that's the other thing about, we don't have to prove we're through the addiction. We have to help each other to be able to maneuver through the addiction. By that I mean, if something's going to tempt you down a road, I'm going to use this as an illustration. If the bar that I always got drunk at is down this road, or the refrigerator I eat too much at is down this hallway, or whatever, that store or that channel that I'm a compulsive shopper, or I know that if I go over here, I'm going to buy all the lottery tickets. If I'm a compulsive gambler, I need to stay away from the casino. Whatever my addiction is, pornography, whatever it is, if I'm going to walk down that road to prove to myself that I am over this, guess what I'll probably do? Get involved with it. So I want you to, because a lot of times we say, I walked down that road and I fell into this pit and it took me a long time to get out. So then we're like recovered. We're like, I went through all these steps. I did this. I'm going to walk down the road. I'm going to look into the pit of my addiction, and I walked around it. That's usually where I see a lot of people in therapy and they think they're done. I'm like, let's just do a little bit more work here, because I want you, when you look down that road that is so normal for you, what I want you to do is go, I'm going to pick a different road. Because that's what an addiction does. It lures you into something that you used to do or you can't do. Does that make sense? So hopefully this was encouraging. There are some handouts that can give you the information and the acronyms for this. I want to take questions if anybody has any questions here at the end, whether it's about anything I said or even just any random things about addictions. You guys have any questions? Yes.
I wanted to make sure the questions, did you say yes to me?
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that you didn't take no questions. This is not a really practical question. This is a news question.
Okay.
But since you know all about addictions, can you give me and us a summary of what's going on right now with the huge spike? Is it opioid addictions, painkillers, going to other things? How does a prescription drug addiction crisis go like I hear it's going? How does it start if it's prescription drugs?
Prescription drugs usually mean that I go to a doctor, I've watched a commercial, and they will write me a script. And when the word on the street gets out for what doctors do that, people go to those doctors. People can legitimately need pain meds, and they're fearful they're going to need the pain, or they're going to need it that day. Let's say you left your house and you're going, I had surgery, my knee doesn't hurt, but it kind of does. I'm going to go ahead and take that drug, okay? And you like the way it makes you feel. I think sometimes they're overprescribed, and doctors today don't want to be sued. Now, not all doctors are like this. Please understand they're not. But a lot of it is, if I go in and I say, I want this drug, I have this symptom, they'll hand me the script. There are certain doctors in town that they won't even prescribe any meds that are addictive, because they don't want to be that doctor to prescribe that. The other thing, you're asking the word on the street, the drug on the street right now. Meth used to be the biggest problem, and now it's heroin. Heroin has made a huge, huge comeback. It's cheaper and it's easier to get, and it's not as volatile. You're not blowing your barn up or your house and that kind of stuff. That's probably the biggest surprise in the drug scene that we have today, is we weren't expecting that to come back, and that obviously, because it's heroin, a lot of times you use it obviously with needles, and then that is a snowball effect for all the other things, the hepatitis and the transfer of all the other diseases like that. So, but pain meds are a huge problem, and they're very accessible. When people talk about their kids, usually when people have had surgery or they're in pain, chronic pain, things like that, parents have them in their home, so it's accessible to get, and so the kids are taking them out of their own medicine cabinets when they find out what they're worth on the street too. Good question. Anyone else? One of the things that I wanted to point out is a lot of times we do just think, well, I'm not a drug addict and I'm not an alcoholic, and we always think of the big things. And I want you to think about how life-controlling issues can be something that's very acceptable. And basically and hopefully in the scriptures you saw that, it's just basically taking something you're not trusting the Lord with your life. And that's part of a discipleship process, to say, Lord, I really want you to be Lord of my life in all these areas. And so you can be addicted to something that's actually really good, and basically an addiction, the definition of that is what I did for good is now controlling me. So that's where pain meds, yes, you needed them for the surgery, but the surgery was a year ago. You don't need them anymore. And chronic pain is chronic pain. I mean, there's no denying when somebody's in pain or somebody has severe migraines, that those are the people that a lot of times they get addicted to stuff and they didn't mean to. So just as a side note, if there are some programs that you know that somebody is addicted to that and they want to get off of those, you have to go into those programs and say, I want to be completely drug-free. Or what those programs usually do is they get you addicted to another drug. And a lot of times there's kickbacks for that. And I'm generally speaking here, I'm not talking about a particular program, but just so you know, when you're helping a friend or you're going to go into a program, you need to say, I want to be completely drug-free, so that they can help you if that's possible to do. And there are agencies like that that say, let's say you have migraines, okay, or you are a person that has seizures. We're not going to get you off all your medicine. We don't want to do that. I've had people do that. They're like, well, they need to get off of this. Well, what they were addicted to was helping them, basically, I'll say, calm the voices in their head, if you will. You know what I mean? So they were using it to use what maybe medication were. Now, medication, by a doctor is going to be safer than somebody self-medicating. So a lot of times that's where you have to bridge those and go, well, how long have you smoked marijuana? Well, why did you use it in the first place? And some of them is because of pain. So I mean, that obviously is going to be changing in the next few years also, about the use of that and what it's actually doing to the brain and the society and different things like that. So we're kind of on the edge of what used to be an addiction now is legal some places, but it didn't change the fact of how addictive it is and what it's doing when it's not monitored correctly. So, any other questions? That was good. Yes?
What would you recommend if we have a friend or a loved one or someone who, we're maybe noticing an addictive behavior, and but they're not to the point where they're ready to admit it, and how can we kind of talk with them without pushing them away, I guess? What would you recommend?
Everybody's at a different level. You definitely need to build a relationship with somebody. Just to randomly walk up to somebody because you don't know their story of why they're doing it or what's going on. One of the things I think too is when you build a relationship, you have more than one conversation. That's why, like, when you watch these intervention shows and they bring the people in or whatever, and they've done a lot of legwork to get to that. But then people are like, that's what I need to do with my brother, uncle, whatever. We're just going to bring him in and have my aunt sit here. Well, if you don't have a relationship with them, they're not going to listen to you anyway. So what I would suggest is I guess you go back to what Jesus did. What did Jesus do with the people that were sinning? He ate dinner with them. He hung out with them. He had conversations with them. There's a line between accepting what the person's doing and accepting the person. Always accept the person. Because the bottom line is we're all sinners and we all do stuff. It just is a different level. And that's what I would recommend, is just getting to know them and let them know you're going to love them through that. When I talk about this woman, Barbara, one of the parts that our relationship was, it was very volatile at first. She hated me. She would swear at me. Sometimes I thought she was going to hit me. And I just kept loving her. And just because I was like, the worst thing you could do, what are you going to do? I mean, if you hurt me physically, you're going to leave. If you kill me, I'll be in heaven. I mean, it wasn't that blatant, but it was kind of, and I was never in danger, but it was just that whole intimidation thing. And I just built a relationship with somebody who really thought they were unlovable. And so I think that's part of it, is there's some self things going on, whether it's self-hate, self-doubt, that you can bridge that gap that has nothing to do with their addiction. Because a lot of times I hear people, when they've walked through something, how did you come out of this? And they'll name somebody. They'll name a grandma, they'll name a mom, they'll name an aunt, uncle, somebody like that, a pastor, and you never know what you have done by just sitting down and talking to somebody. Watching somebody that eats by themselves every single day. You have no idea what they're walking through, and sometimes just that one piece of information can help them. But I think still including them and letting them be part of it, as long as it's not volatile where they're stealing and things like that from the family. But accepting the person and not what they do is a tricky line. But I know that is what every addict needs, is they need to have somebody in their corner. That's not enabling them. That would be a whole nother talk. So, any other questions? I know I'm ending a couple minutes early. Yes?
You have at the bottom list of books. Does anything stand out that you would like to point out as a place to start for anybody here? What are there differences between them? Any more comments on your resources at the bottom, in other words?
Okay. I can tell you what they all mean. The first one is search for significance, and this is basically dealing with somebody's self-esteem. This is basically saying there's self-assessments in there on the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the feeling of shame, and the fear of being punished, or if you're very judgmental, to punish other people. And it's basically the core of who we are. It's not gender specific, but it's basically the core of that we are fearful of something. We're afraid of, I'm going to fail. It's one of those books that I have used over the last 30 years. They revised it many times. And let's say that and you don't even have to read the whole thing. It can be, I just went through a place where I felt really rejected, or I failed over here. I could just read that portion of the book. And it gives you helps, and it helps you be introspective of how you would deal with it, and then gives the scriptures to back that up. And let's jump to the bottom. These are the general ones. The other ones are specific to those topics. Is Stepping into Freedom. This is Living Free Ministries, and this is basically a 12-step journey for groups. One of the things, I was at a church one time that we did support groups, and I was always asked, why don't you do an AA group here? Why don't you do, Al-Anon and those kinds of things? We, in this city, we have lots of those meetings, and I wanted a place for people to go after that. You only have so many volunteers you can train, so I knew people could go to AA, the Al-Anon meetings, and all the things like that. I wanted a place they could come, and that would be the next step for discipleship. And this is one of the best things I've ever seen written, to basically tie those two things together. It's a 12-step group that ties the scripture and how do I walk this out? I know what to say, but how do I actually apply this and walk it out? The other ones are The Bondage Breaker just talks about, that's just a book talking about life-controlling behaviors. Wired for Intimacy is one of the great things to explain pornography and why it's so addictive. I think that's the other thing. Sometimes we need to know why it's so addictive. That's a really good resource for that. Faithful and True, it's a workbook by Mark Laser. This is one of the best curriculums I've ever seen on sexual addiction. The book is divided into 2 parts. It talks about sexual addiction in the one half, and the other half talks about what healthy sexuality looks like. Most people have never been taught what healthy sexuality looks like. All they have is basically what the movies and society is telling us. My husband and I taught this class. We actually have a whole thing we put together for this. And he took the men of the church we were at, and I took the women. And the first night we had 75 women show up. I'm making copies and filling in chairs or whatever. And when those ladies went home and said, yeah, Pastor Don's going to be speaking on sex, 75 husbands showed up. So the first time we did this, we had 150 people, and it's like a 6 or 8 week course. And it was amazing to us that people came up that were in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they said, no one has ever talked about this in the context of the church. It was always that dirty thing you didn't do or you were abused. Nobody ever told us what we can do. And I was like, and that's kind of become a platform for me, because I do a lot of premarital counseling, because Satan has taken it to this addictive level, and it's this wonderful gift that God has created between a man and a woman. And so this curriculum deals with both sides. This is how you deal with the addict side, but you can't deal with the addict side if you're not going to replace it with what truth is. So that is in a workbook form, and that's probably one of the best things I've seen written for that. And Out of the Far Country is Christopher Yuan's testimony of how he walked out of a homosexual lifestyle, a gay lifestyle. And it talks about how his parents helped him along that journey, and just his journey of that. So those are just a few things. I mean, there's obviously tons of other resources. I just put some just on the hot topics that you usually ask me about.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Any other questions? Thank you so much for giving up your lunch to come today, and I don't know if you have any.
I don't. Let's thank Nancy
Okay.
Les personnages dans mes tableaux, à me voir vivre en décroché, mes idées folles de